This is Taking Stock on Bloomberg. I'm Pim Fox. Now, the S&P 500's industrial index, it's underperformed the broader market so far this year as demand for large machinery, it's slumped. But if the economy turns around, does it make sense to buy these industrial stocks now? Well, let's ask the question of the expert, Nick Heymann, analyst at Sterne, Agee, and Leech. He knows everything about industrials. Nick, it's good to have you with us. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks,
now, I know that you're just back from a trip to many sites, many locations in Europe right now. And the insight that you gained from that, a little bit troubling, right? I mean, tell me what you heard. There were about 3 pieces, but let's start with the first unsettling piece of news.
Yeah, we know many of these same CEOs we saw were down in Florida in late May, and they were cautiously optimistic. And I would say they were guardedly cautious, coming back in our trip from Europe a couple weeks ago. And the reason really was there was a little bit less certainty associated with the fact that the government spending on infrastructure would actually show up and kind of be that bridge until aggregate demand recovered in 2011, 2012. And that was definitely, a little different tone than we thought. And of course, everything's supposed to be getting better.
Right. So, I mean, there are green shoots not showing up, at least from the perspective of these CEOs when you went to Europe.
Yeah, and, they were in turn much more focused and confident on executing for their internal programs. And Kurzarbeit, which Germany has as a short work week, is an element that they feel gives them an edge, helps take, a lot of the heat off of the trough because they can have partial work weeks for their employees. And then when they come back up, while the rate of improvement won't be as sharp, it certainly will allow them to find their workers without having to go out and start from scratch.
Now, part of it also had to do, I think in the report you talked about service contracts. They were talking about how service was a real sweet spot for the business right now because, as you said, they just don't know. They don't have any visibility.
Yeah, it was funny. The first thing I want to talk about was service. When you suppose they're thinking, well, is there any, firming up in the outlook or, certainly an end to any kind of renegotiation on, your business backlogs for price, because that had been a big concern. And for the component guys, that's happened. For the end product power producers or whatever, if they start seeing that backlog roll over and come down, that's when they're worried that they're going to have, well, I'll call you back in a little bit, Pim, when I need to get that power plant. And then suddenly the message really between the lines is, can you reprice it for me?
So the margin's going to get crushed.
So that would be the worst case scenario when, in fact, at that time in the first half of next year, you'd probably start to see commodity prices become a negative. They'll be positive in many cases the second half of this year in a little window. And then they could, if they stay where they are, they could turn around and be, a headwind.
You call this what, the commodity reflation trap, right?
Commodity reflation trap. And obviously that's why a lot of these management are so much more cautious, especially in the U.S., because in the U.S., they really don't have the Kurzarbeit program.
Now, Kurzarbeit, that's the idea where the German government picks up a tab for the workers' employment and the cost of having a worker, even though they're not working 100% of the time.
Right. Merkel in Germany has just moved from 18 now to 24 months of Kurzarbeit, and they will pick up 65% of the regular work week that the employee doesn't work. And then after 7 months, they'll pick up all the overhead and social costs. So it's a really pretty sweet deal.
And that's a big competitive edge against the U.S. companies, right?
It's a huge competitive advantage, and it also is why the tone of much of the business environment and this consumer spending is not nearly as weak as it is here in the U.S.
What about the actual companies themselves? Are they going to see any inroads in U.S. business? Is that where they want to take market share away from U.S. companies?
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. The fact that they're all hoping to kind of come out of this downturn in a much, much better position strategically than they would have going in. Siemens has moved up to now be really preeminent in healthcare, and they've also taken the lead this year in wind because they're so strong on offshore wind.
Right. We're going to talk about those in detail. All right, we're going to have more with Nick Heymann, more on how European industrials are trying to beat the Americans at their own game, plus a look at Nick Heymann's stock picks. We're also going to talk about how the new clean energy bill could affect the industrial companies.
This bill will create new businesses, new industries, and millions of new jobs, all without imposing untenable new burdens on the American people or America's businesses. In the months to come, the Senate will take up its version of the energy bill, and I am confident that they, too, will choose to move this country forward.
This is Taking Stock on Bloomberg. I'm Pim Fox. We're talking about industrial companies. My guest is analyst Nick Heymann of Sterne, Agee, Leech, expert in all things industrial. Now, Nick, before we get to some of the specific stocks, you just heard President Obama promoting the clean energy bill that would pass the House on Friday. What role could this play for the American industrial companies? I mean, this has a lot to do with power generation, right?
Right. I think, Obama is trying to figure out how, one, to take and rather than adding just tons more capacity to generate power more cleanly, he's first saying, look, whatever we generate, let's eliminate the losses, which are today 30–40%, because we use AC rather than high voltage DC. So that'll be a big source. We'll try to enlighten consumers so you know how much you're actually using. There's been a lot of studies showing that this can save another 10 or 15%. And then I think he's thinking more along the lines of wind. Nuclear seems to have been slipping back, to the right in terms of the timetable.
Well, you don't look like you're going to get a lot of the government subsidies that the companies say they need in order to build these nuclear power plants, right? I mean, insurance for
big bucks. And, we all know it's, not a time for the most expensive solution in Washington for anything. It's the least, capital intensive.
All right. So wind, for example, what's the sort of landscape looking like for wind? Because there's onshore wind and there's offshore wind.
Offshore is really big now around the British Isles, north coast of Germany, and certainly the leaders there are Siemens and Vestas. Onshore, GE is very strong. Of course, here domestically, which is mostly onshore, we just had an offshore program up off Nantucket approved. But it's really been hard because of financing. And we got the government, the DOE, to come in and agree to change the subsidy to now have a guarantee for part of the loan. But there was all kinds of mix-ups with the IRS. That's about to be resolved, but it basically stalled out wind here stateside for the first half of the year.
So if this does get resolved intelligently, I mean, who wins? Does GE win, for example?
GE will certainly jump back into the saddle. But we've also seen a lot, now of new plants opened up for wind here in the U.S. Colorado, Vestas opened up, quite a large facility. And, wind is a very big focus. The bearing companies tell us that, and they're very knowledgeable, looking 3, 4, 5 years ahead as to where the activity will be for anyone moving parts.
All right. Now, you told me about nuclear. You said that looks like it's pretty much on hold for the time being. We talked a little bit about wind. What about, the regulations having to do with coal and coal-fired plants? Because, GE plays in the coal-fired world.
No, I think coal will be big, but offshore. I think coal's going to be very challenged here domestically. And certainly that would seem to be the case with regards to a lot of the contracts that are either, right now kind of in limbo. We've had a lot of contracts that have actually been pushed out or deferred. And so that's something that, nobody wants to commit to going forward until you really know what the cost of producing is going to be under the new regulations. And it looks like it's going to be fairly onerous for coal-based producers.
What about actual stocks right now? If people want to buy into this theme, if they think that that the energy bill is going to benefit certain players, who's it going to benefit the most?
Well, there's so many different ways to look at it. One is, green buildings. And green buildings is right now a bit of a concept because, again, we have to have the government probably get involved in trying to delineate a way to get through two problems. One, most buildings have been flipped, so they don't have a lot of equity, so you can't borrow against the building's equity to be able to have the owner upgrade. We did that with the Empire State Building very successfully. That was unusual. The second is all of the different leases are staggered. So when they're triple net leases, the owner, or the tenant gets the benefit, and the owner who put the capital up. So we got to get that, sorted out, and it will get sorted out, and that will become a bigger, opportunity for certainly United Technologies Carrier, JCI's York. I think that it will certainly be a big opportunity for Ingersoll, which is very, very strong in commercial HVAC, and I think that that's something yet to come. It hasn't been sorted out yet. In terms of other opportunities, obviously there's component suppliers to wind. And so that would be ABB, which has about a 40% share of the transformers.
And they want to get bigger there.
And they want to get bigger there, and then they want to do the same thing in rail, because rail's obviously become the well,
that's going to be my last question for you. So tell me about what's going on in the rail industry right now, because there are some companies that are really trying to take advantage of the cost differential and the cost benefits of moving everything by rail.
Moving everything by rail, freighter people's about 40% less. And so now you've got leadership there. Number one is Bombardier. Number two is Alstom. And number three is Siemens. Very strong suppliers. There are some light rail suppliers out of Japan and Asia. But everybody, 70% historically of the rail business has been in Europe, which has a very well-developed rail system. We are obviously eager here in the U.S. There's significant funds now, about $62 billion earmarked towards supporting that over the next few years. And South America's come alive. China is spending big money right today on rail. So it's going to be a good growth area.
All right, we're going to have to follow it, and we're glad that you're on the rails for us and checking out what's going on.
Okay.
Thanks very much for your insight, as always. Nick Heymann, expert in all things industrial, coming to us from Sterne, Agee, Leech.